Good morning and welcome to all of you who are joining today. I see we are 30 now, so that's quite impressive. Thank you for all of you. So today this webinar is on agrarian change in Eastern Gangetic Plains and the role of groundwater, and we will be comparing what has happened and what is happening between West Bengal and Bangladesh. Very briefly, I must say that this work that we will present in this webinar has received support from ACR through a research grant. And I should also say a big thank you and mention that the researcher, so Partha Banerjee in West Bengal, and his team is in West Bengal, and NGO from Public Health in Bangladesh. They help us in gathering, collecting the data that we are using in this work. So thanks to them. With that being said, we are together for about 2 hours, and that's how the webinar will be organized. We'll start with a short introduction by Dr. Robin Johnson from ACR. Then we'll follow with the presentation by Dr. Aditi Mukherjee from International Water Management Institute. And that will give us some material, I think, to jump into the panel discussion. So we today have 5 panelists. Thank you to all of you who are accepted to join. We'll have Professor Sata Mandal from BAU, Professor Koichi Fujita from Kyoto University, Dr. Anindita Sakar from the University of Delhi, Dr. Tushar Shah from IMI, and Mr. Anu Koshwa from ADB. And after the panel discussion, we should have enough time to move to a question and answer, and we'll finish, hopefully, we will have active participation during this question and answer, and then we will move to very brief concluding remarks. Very quickly, some tips, house room rules while we all are on Zoom. We decided to keep the webinar as a meeting so that you can directly participate during the question and answer, but that's also mean that we would appreciate that while you're not speaking during the panel discussion and the presentation, you mute and you start your video. And obviously when you will be speaking, just unmute and potentially share your video. Please use the chat box whenever you want. That can also be a place for side discussion during the presentation and the panel. And finally, during the Q&A, you can raise your hand and I will just nominate you to ask your question or give your comment. Last point, I must say that this webinar will be recorded. So with that, I think we can move on to the introduction by Robin. So Dr. Robin Johnson is the Research Program Manager for Water at the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. Before joining ACR in 2017, she was a principal researcher with IMI. She has previously worked with the Murray-Darling Basin Commission and the Mekong River Commission. She worked as environmental advisor for Horsehead and with the Bureau of Rural Sciences and Geosciences in Australia. She has been working on science and policy of land and water management. Over to you, Dr. Johnson, for the introduction. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marie-Charlotte. It's a very great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this webinar this afternoon, and particularly because, as Marie-Charlotte says, I have previously worked with IMI, so it's lovely to see lots of familiar faces. Before we start, though, I do want to say that we recognise that these are very difficult times for South Asia and for India and Nepal in particular. So we salute you for your persistence and courage in continuing your research. And our thoughts are with you as your countries battle a pandemic. For those of you who don't know ACR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, we're Australia's specialist agricultural research for development agency. And our goal is to promote productive and sustainable agricultural systems through international agricultural research partnerships. And it is very much about partnerships. The work that will be presented today is part of a broader portfolio of research that ACR is supporting on the topic of sustainable intensification of agricultural systems in the Eastern Gangetic Plain, This is funded in part under an Australian government initiative called the Sustainable Development Investment Portfolio, which has been a fairly major program over the last 8 years. And we have lots of information from that program in our website, and I'll put a link to the website in the chat a little later. I would encourage you to go and have a look at that. It is the sort of framing for the work that Aditi will present today. ACR is focusing on the Eastern Gangetic Plain because of the urgency and importance of the agricultural challenges in this region, and because of the importance of the area for the governments of India, Bangladesh and Nepal. So the region has a rapidly growing population, currently at around 450 million, the world's highest concentration of rural poverty, a strong dependence on agriculture for food security and livelihoods, and significant vulnerability to climate change. So securing and improving agricultural productivity is a very important priority. Given the populations, intensification of agriculture is inevitable. To meet the nutritional demands, diversification is going to be essential. So there's a need for a very significant transformation of the food production systems in this very complex and varied region. And I'd say that part of the fascination of working in the Eastern Gangetic Plain is the opportunity for the sort of comparative study that Aditi will be presenting today, working across areas with similar agroecologies, but different management and policy histories to help us understand what drives and supports successful change. So a component of this research that ACR has been supporting is exploring the water, energy, food nexus, and particularly how access to water and energy promotes or constrains agricultural productivity. And we're very fortunate in this regard to be able to draw on IWMI's long history and ongoing involvement in water management for agriculture in India. And it's a great pleasure to have IWMI's Indian scientists, and particularly Dr. Tushar Shah, joining us today. There's a widespread understanding that access to secure water is a critical piece of the puzzle for agricultural intensification and diversification. So one policy drive, not just in India, but in many places, has been to improve rural energy supplies to allow smallholders to access groundwater. However, as an earlier study by IWMI in West Bengal that Aditi undertook last year showed, somewhat to our surprise, that improving access to energy didn't have a major impact on groundwater use or on corresponding agricultural productivity. Other factors, including the high cost of production relative to market prices, seemed to play a larger role. So this result convinced us that we really needed to better understand what the role of groundwater really is in agrarian change in the region and how it interplays with other factors. And so we commissioned IWMI and Aditi to undertake a deeper dive into this very complex area. So I'm fascinated to hear what has come out of the study, and I thank IWMI and Aditi and the team for the work that they've done, and I'll hand back to you to see what you have to tell us. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for this introduction. And I think, yeah, that was very useful to have this bigger picture and to put this work into perspective. Without further delay, I think we'll simply go to the presentation by Dr. Mukherjee, and I will. So yes, Aditi, you can share your screen while I'm just introducing you. So Dr. Aditi Mukherjee is principal researcher at IWMI. She works on climate change adaptation and water energy food nexus. In 2012, she was awarded the inaugural Norman Border Field Award, endowed by the Rockefeller Foundation and given by the World Food Prize Foundation. She is currently a coordinating lead author for the water chapter in the IPCC assessment. Aditi, the floor is yours, and your presentation should be around 35 minutes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Marie, and thank you, Robin, for the opportunity of doing this research, which is very close to our heart, given that we have been working now on this for over, 10, 15 years, maybe. This work we started doing last year, but it took quite a long time to get the database together. And for that, I'm deeply thankful to both Mr. Parthasarathi and Mr. Hassan from NGO Forum Bangladesh and Parthasarathi for West Bengal for having given us this very concise and comprehensive database during this pandemic times. And we have used that, whatever findings we have today. What we will be looking at today is role of groundwater in agrarian change in both West Bengal and Bangladesh. Even though we say 1990s, yes, that's our focus, but we take actually a bit more longer term, right from the 1970s. And these are all of us who have been involved in the study. So first, for a few minutes, I would like to set the context, and many of you who have joined this webinar are very well aware of the context. For one, Bangladesh and West Bengal, this Bengal Plains must be one of those areas where the agrarian change has been a matter of huge interest for I don't know, several centuries, because if you go back to literature, you actually see literature over 4 or 5 centuries that is documenting agrarian change in the Bengal Delta. So fertile plains, rich peasant tradition, and a history of very high agricultural growth in both the Mughal as well as the Nawabi Bengal. That's before 1770, that is before the British. And then again, during the British time from 1770 to 1860, was achieved mostly through extensive margins, which basically means just expanding of area under cultivation. And this got the name, I mean, Bengal was referred to as Sonar Bangla, which means golden Bengal, both because of his wealth and also some reference to these, ripe yellow paddy in the fields. So that kind of evoked this image that this was a golden Bengal, which was a very wealthy place. In 1793, that was still during the Company Raj. I mean, before the British Empire took over. But at that time, what happened was permanent settlement and invocation of zamindari system, which is kind of one land system. I'll be happy to talk about it. I'm sure most of you are aware of what permanent settlement and zamindari system was. And that initially spurred growth through bringing in more fallow land, again through extensive margins. And at the same time, population grew rapidly to supply surplus labor, but soon growth from extensive margin was exhausted, given population growth basically outstripped that of agricultural growth. And that requires shifts to intensification, which means that from one monsoon fed paddy, you had to shift to double or triple crop. And that's where the main kind of bottleneck arose. What happened during the next century from 1860s to 1960s, that Bengal became, from like Sonar Bangla, it became eponymous with poverty, famine, and high population growth. And it is around this time, there was this book by James Boyce, a very well-known book, that hypothesized that intensification of farming, that is growing of double and triple crops, could not happen due to lack of incentives by the landowning classes, which kind of comes from the land system instituted through the zamindari system. And he also said that lack of water control, including both flood and groundwater irrigation, was thought to be the main impediment. So that's how it was by the time his book was published. What happened was, by 1987, both Bengals were showing high rates of agricultural growth. In the meanwhile, India became independent in 1947. Bangladesh became East Pakistan at the same time, and then Bangladesh became independent in 1971. So obviously, this is a very, as Robin said, that this is a very interesting area for researchers, because you have two places with very similar agroecology, a shared history, a shared culture, but very two different policy settings. Around 1990s, around 1999, this book, for which I have the picture, was published. And what they did was they compared agrarian change in Bangladesh and West Bengal from 1970s till mid 1990s. And this book, with some exception, there were exceptions like papers by Richard Palmer Jones, etc. And also I know Professor Fujita here has also done research on this, but largely there was some amount of consensus that West Bengal had achieved higher growth rates than Bangladesh due to agrarian reforms, which was more land reforms as well as panchayati, local government reforms. A finding that was later supported by Abhijit Banerjee, Pranab Bardhan, and others, but is also disputed. I mean, the role of groundwater wasn't, I think, wasn't as prominent as it could have been during that debate. So that was what's happened till mid 1990s when West Bengal was registering higher growth than Bangladesh, and that's where much of the scholarship unfortunately stops. We have not seen any study that traces this trajectory beyond the mid 90s. So we feel that our contribution is kind of filling that gap. Since mid 1990s, what is clear is Bangladesh has been experiencing much higher growth rates in agriculture than West Bengal, slowed down. And in this presentation, we try to explore why. Just some very basic parameters. I won't go into each one of those, and we'll be happy to share the presentation at any point. But that's the location of our study area. And this table just wants to say that West Bengal and Bangladesh are very similar in terms of rainfall, preponderance of small and marginal farmers, very small landholding sizes. So like 1.6 to 1.8 acres. Then similar poverty rates. So poverty rates are higher in West Bengal than in Bangladesh. A similar share of GDP in agriculture in GDP, as well as similar share of workforce employed in agriculture, which is again slightly higher in West Bengal. We also see the share of agriculture in GDP in Bangladesh has been falling rapidly, and not so rapidly, started from a lower base and has not been falling, also been falling in West Bengal. These are all the data sources that we have accumulated. Majority of our data is post 1990, but we also have data from 1970, especially for the crops and for the number of groundwaters, number of like sources of irrigation. So we have data around agriculture, which is mostly crops, sources of irrigation. We have data on temperature and rainfall, and we have data on groundwater, groundwater tables, and etc. And so this database was, I mean, all of it is publicly available, but are not so easy to get. I mean, it involves photocopying old, data books. So this took quite a bit of time. Now, so it's as you can imagine, it's a huge amount of data, and there are like various threads of the story going around. So the way I want to present it today is to talk about 6 interrelated themes, and each theme will hopefully can be woven together into one or two coherent narratives. So our first is around intensification, where boro paddy is the summer irrigated paddy. If you remember Boyce's thesis around intensification happened in Bengal through cultivation of boro paddy, which is a completely irrigated crop, unlike almond and oush paddy, which are mostly rain-fed crop and grows during monsoon. So our first block would be around understanding what's been happening to boro paddy in both these places. Given that boro paddy is completely irrigated, there has been a reliance on groundwater resources for cultivating boro paddy. And what has also emerged are informal water markets. So in the second chunk, we will look at groundwater and groundwater markets, and actually we would look at together with electrification and diesel pumps. Because our work previous, and also work by Tushar and Professor Fujita and Professor Mondol, all of them have worked on groundwater markets, and the importance of the fuel, like whether the pumps are run on electricity or diesel, is a very important determinant on the pricing of that water. And most of these water markets are informal, and where one neighbor sells water to another. So in the second chunk, we will be talking around groundwater and electrification and pumps. Then our next segue from this would be, given the higher electricity tariffs, different modalities of pricing, as well as higher diesel prices, what has happened inevitably is a rising cost of cultivation and declining boro profits, which has led to diversification. In our fourth piece, we will talk about these recent trends around diversification and declining profits. And all these four pieces, like what led to intensification of boro, what led to groundwater markets and extraction of groundwater, what determined electrification and prices of diesel, what determines diversification, all of these are actually determined by water, energy, and food nexus policies and the public discourses that surround it. So in our fifth piece, we will be talking about how these public discourses as well as these policies are different in Bangladesh and West Bengal. So it's kind of, and then the final piece would be also we can start to see impacts of climate change, possibly on groundwater recharge, and also the need to reduce emissions from irrigation leads us to solar irrigation. So these are our major 6 blocks, and these are a kind of different color coded. And because there's quite a bit of detail that we have in the presentation, we thought that it might make sense to provide the storyline at the very beginning. And this is the storyline that we would be following. And the color codes we showed previously would come here again. So we have divided our storyline into 2 periods. One is a period of high growth, which was from early 1980s to mid 1990s in West Bengal, and it was early 1980s towards the end of 2010 in Bangladesh. That is the time when agricultural growth was rapid, area under, and that was because of expansion in area production, APY is area production and yield of boro paddy. So the parts of the storyline is that that happened because of intensive groundwater use, adoption of high yielding varieties of seeds and fertilizers. So basically the 2 components of green revolution here. And also in initial years, there was very high profit from boro cultivation. Intensive groundwater use has been attributed to agrarian reforms in West Bengal, but that's highly debated, and the role of groundwater is, I think, just equally important. Intensive groundwater use in Bangladesh has been attributed largely to market reforms. Around 1987-88, Bangladesh liberalized its pump import regimes. Earlier, there were controls about the quality of the pumps that could be imported, and only very high quality pumps from Japan like Honda, etc. could be imported with very high costs. So following a drought event in 1987, Bangladesh decided to liberalize its pump restrictions, as well as it removed those, there were earlier restrictions on spacing of wells. So that played an important role. And this is all, this is very clear from the literature. The other thing that played an important role was easy credit for pumps. And this was more so for Bangladesh than West Bengal. West Bengal, yes, but it was more so from Bangladesh, from all the, microcredit groups that Bangladesh is so well known for. Intensive groundwater use also led to the creation of informal groundwater markets. And we talk about these markets, and so these informal groundwater markets, in terms, the way these markets operate were in terms determined by the electricity tariff as well as the diesel prices. And diesel prices were quite low early on relative to the output prices. Then high profit of boro was because, as I said, favorable diesel to paddy prices as well as favorable wage rate to paddy price. And all this led to improved food availability in both the places, but also decline in rural poverty in both the places. So parts of our story is, as Robin mentioned, that this is also part of water, energy, food nexus. So a part of our story is about water, another part is about energy, about food, and about policies. In the period 2, we have a different storyline. Actually, the period 2 is actually the period where we see stagnant to low growth. That's early to mid 1990s in West Bengal and 2010 onwards in Bangladesh. We see slowdown in groundwater irrigation. We also see high cost of cultivation of boro and low profits. We say that the slowdown happened partly because of restrictive groundwater policies that includes metering and tariffs, high diesel prices, which obviously led to diversification to low water consuming crops. The other part of the groundwater story is also popular discourses around groundwater, which were very different in West Bengal. In West Bengal, right from 1980s, early 1990s, there was a lot of concern about groundwater depletion. Not even though there wasn't much depletion at that point. On the other hand, in Bangladesh, the storyline was a bit different, because there the major emphasis was on getting like achieving food self-sufficiency. So groundwater, we kind of briefly look at issue of groundwater depletion, and we suspect that there may have been a slowdown in recharge, but we are not specialists in this, so we really feel this requires more work. And this could be a climate change impact, as we show later on that there have been a significant decline in both rainfall and increase in temperature. So even though the cropping pattern hasn't changed, the ET may have changed and the recharge may have also changed. And this brings us also to the need, like all of us, irrespective of who is a historic emitter and who is not, the need of the hour is everybody would need to mitigate along with adapt, and therefore comes the role of solar irrigation. We just have a slide on that. So these are the two storylines. Again, we have water, energy, food policies, as well as climate change in the second period. I think we need to look at climate change more carefully. So I will now go one by one through each of these bits, and quickly walk you over what has happened with intensification of boro paddy. First of all, paddy like amon, aush, and boro. Amon and aush are the rain-fed paddy, and boro is the irrigated paddy. They dominate cropping pattern in both Bangladesh as well as West Bengal, and accounts for 60 to 80% of the gross cropped area. Area production of boro, as I've already said, has expanded significantly between 80s to mid 90s in West Bengal, and between 1980s to the end of 2000 in Bangladesh, and it has grown at a slower pace till then. Our main finding is that yield of boro paddy and share of land under boro is much higher in Bangladesh. Bangladesh has almost saturated the area that can potentially be put under boro paddy, while that's not the case in West Bengal. And our other finding is that there's also lesser yield variability in irrigated boro in Bangladesh, perhaps showing better access to irrigation. So that's how we segue into the irrigation story. So just to clarify, just to kind of support all our major findings, first, paddy dominates cropping pattern, and these are four figures from two from West Bengal, area under food grains. Everything in green is paddy, everything, and this is also area under food grain, everything in green is paddy. So you can see that both Bangladesh and West Bengal are literally, paddy growing regions. Same with the production. Within the paddy area, within these three paddy, aush, amon, and boro, we see area under amon remain more or less constant. This is the area under amon in West Bengal. It remained more or less constant. The area under aush paddy has declined sharply, while the area under boro paddy rose during this entire time period from almost 50 years, from 1966 to 2016. It's exactly the same in Bangladesh. The time period is a little different, 1971 to 2019-20. I mean, comparable time period, but exactly the same trend. Area under amon has remained stagnant, aush has declined, and that of boro has increased significantly. Now, that's why we now focus on boro, because that's where all the growth happened, and that's really drove the agricultural growth in the region. When we look at boro, we find exactly a very similar mimicking of the phases of boro. The time periods are different though. In West Bengal, the largest rise happened in the very first period from 1966 to mid 1994. Then there was a period of stagnation around from mid 90s to end of 2009. And in very recent years, we find even negative growth in area under boro paddy. In Bangladesh, it's a similar one. The periods are different. So there was growth in till 19. I think in Bangladesh, there is anyway higher growth, as you can see in this, especially the second period. Similar trends in production of boro paddy. Though West Bengal sees some increase in boro paddy production in recent years, that is from 2010 to 2017-18, and again quite similar in terms of the yield. The yields have not increased as much as area and production initially, but Yeah, so we have again 3 periods of growth, and we can see some yield increases in West Bengal in recent years. With those are the similarities. The differences are these: Bangladesh produces more than double the amount of paddy than West Bengal. And obviously, as we saw, that Bangladesh has 1.8 million acres of net sown area compared to West Bengal's 1.2 million acres. So obviously, Bangladesh has a lot more area. So that's one part of the story, certainly. So here we have the comparative scale, and you can see Bangladesh's production is double that of West Bengal. But part of it is also due to higher paddy yields in Bangladesh. So this is again a yield trend of Bangladesh of Aush, Amon, and Boro. And we use the same scale to show the West Bengal as well. And you can see for each one of these, Aush, Amon, as well as Boro, Bangladesh's production yields are 20 to 30% higher than that of West Bengal. So that's what it shows in this. Larger rice production in Bangladesh relative to its population meant that per capita rice availability has been higher in Bangladesh than in West Bengal. This is again, this map shows per capita rice availability in Bangladesh, per capita rice availability in West Bengal. I mean, of course, West Bengal is a part of India, so per capita rice availability in West Bengal per se doesn't mean much, because it's not an obvious indicator that there is food insecurity, because food can come from any part of India, and we believe the very fact that West Bengal never had to strive for food security on its own is one of the explanation for very different groundwater policies between Bangladesh, which is an independent country and has to think about its own national food security. So overall, we can see that per capita food availability, that is in terms of production, is higher in Bangladesh, lower in West Bengal. And we also see trends in poverty ratios from various sources, and poverty decline in poverty seems to be happening at a much faster pace in Bangladesh than in West Bengal. So yeah, the other part of it is the other difference is that Bangladesh seems to have almost like whatever land could be irrigated, could be put under boro paddy, has been put under boro paddy. So usually the same land where you grow almond paddy during the monsoon season, you can grow boro paddy during the winter season. So almond paddy gets season is between say June, July, and it gets harvested between October, November, and then the boro paddy starts around December, January, and gets harvested in April, May. So it is entirely possible to put land under almond paddy to boro paddy, and it seems in Bangladesh almost 80% of the land on which almond paddy is cultivated also cultivates boro paddy. That proportion is very small for West Bengal. In West Bengal, only 30% of the land under almond is cultivated for boro, and which shows that West Bengal perhaps has more scope for expansion of boro paddy in the future. The other difference between West Bengal and Bangladesh is that Bangladesh has much lower yield variability of irrigated boro, pointing towards more reliable irrigation. So you can see the different phases. This is coefficient of variation, and it's very clear that West Bengal has much higher coefficient of variation. And these are the residuals, and the more they bunch towards zero, the less is the variation. So Bangladesh again has less yield variation, and this is because we say we hypothesize is because of better and reliable groundwater irrigation. That brings us to the irrigation related summary. This is a bit longer and a bit involved. I'll try to be brief. As groundwater irrigation has been one of the main reasons for expansion of area production of boro paddy. Both Bangladesh and West Bengal saw a rapid increase in rise of shallow tubules, but data in West Bengal is of very poor quality. I'll come to that in a minute. Bangladesh saw a rapid increase in number of shallow tubules, as I've already mentioned, after 1988, which was after relaxation of an important policy. And Bangladesh number of shallow tubules grew till around 2010, and it has slowed down since then. And very interestingly, in 2018, Bangladesh has reintroduced similar policy that was cancelled that was removed in 1988. For West Bengal, saw a rise in number of shallow tubules till mid-1990s. And after that, policy restrictions, including groundwater permits, kicked in, which has slowed down its growth. West Bengal removed these restrictions in 2011, and 200,000 new agricultural electricity connections were given, but not without much impact on agricultural outcomes. This is the same that Robin mentioned that we have done in the previous phase of this study. And the reason being, both Bangladesh and West Bengal is seeing rising diesel price to paddy price ratios, and it is dampening incentives for boro cultivation, which will take us to the cost of cultivation and low profits story. So first is groundwater is main source of irrigation in both Bangladesh and West Bengal. If you look at Bangladesh, this is basically showing area under groundwater and area under surface water. This is a very familiar story in all of South Asia. This graph here shows number of shallow tubules and deep tubules in Bangladesh, and you can see right after the removal of the permits, actually the number of shallow tubules went up, and it's kind of started declining since 2010. West Bengal, similar story, a share of groundwater to total irrigated area went up from 6% in 1971 to 66% in 2001. West Bengal has a very problematic data on number of groundwater structures. What it shows here is that we have 5 minor irrigation sensors. Minor irrigation sensors 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what happens after every irrigation sensors, like this was the data from minor irrigation sensors 1, which gives every year how many wells have been constructed. When it comes to the second census, the number kind of, let me see if I can use this laser. So every time a new census happens, these numbers kind of, keep dropping sharply, which gives us very little a way of knowing which are the right numbers. Because if we assume that the numbers haven't dropped, then we can go for estimates all the way to 1.1 million pumps to, and if we assume that these numbers have dropped to only 400,000 pumps. What we did instead was we dug up some more data. We looked at agricultural census data. There is another called IHDS estimates, which are all representative large sample surveys. Then we looked at NSSO, and we actually found that we had some matching points around this estimate. So based on these, we kind of estimate that West Bengal has around 0.9 million shallow tubules, and this number is 1.5 million in Bangladesh. This is just a graphical, this is a map that shows, you can see that much of the density is around these parts, while West Bengal and eastern Bangladesh has much lesser tubal density. This now I'll come to the West Bengal story of what happened to all these electric diesel connections, etc. If you look at the early 1990s, much of eastern India wasn't electrified. This yellow shows percentage of electric pumps to diesel pumps, and this area therefore shows these were completely dependent on diesel pumps. And we know that diesel prices have started going up since 1990s when liberalization happened in India. We also have seen the stagnant area in boro paddy since mid-2000s in West Bengal. Till 2007, West Bengal had one of the highest flat tariffs. I'll come to that. So therefore, we are saying that something called energy squeeze happened. The rise of diesel price and no electric connections till 2010 made irrigation really expensive, and not everybody had access to irrigation. So this graph shows number of new electricity connections given, and you will see that because of certain policies, electricity connections were almost stopped from mid-1990s. So this kind of brings us to informal water markets. I won't be able to go into much detail, but will be happy to answer questions. And our panelists are all experts in water markets. They will bring in more insights. But we did a study. I did a study in I think this paper was published in 2008 in Hydrogeology Journal. And we looked at from NSSO data percentage of households who hire irrigation services. And it turned out that 1/3 of households in West Bengal actually buy irrigation from their neighbors. And I don't have numbers for comparable numbers for Bangladesh, but Bangladesh also has very active water markets. So as I said, what happened by mid 2000, we had steep rise in diesel prices, which made irrigation from diesel pumps less profitable. On the other hand, a high flat tariff of electricity made water markets competitive. I will explain you how. So till 2007, West Bengal had this electricity tariff, which was set as around 10,000 rupees per year, irrespective of number of hours anybody pumped. Irrespective of whether you pump for 10 hours versus, 1,000 hours, the owner of the electric pump had to pay 10,000 rupees to the electricity utility. Given that kind of an electricity tariff, it was profitable it made all the sense for the owner to actually sell as much water as he or she could to the neighbors, and get water prices for that, and that helped them pay the high electricity bill. Because as I showed, everybody is a very small farmer with less than 1 hectare of land, and nobody could irrigate enough to justify that 10,000 electricity bill. So what had happened in West Bengal, and this was something that Tushar had initially talked about, the impact of flat tariffs on groundwater markets. And then in my PhD, I was able to show that West Bengal had one of the most competitive water markets that there ever was. In 2007, government of West Bengal started a program of metering. This was in line with the electricity reforms in India that started in 2003. And West Bengal was only one of the few states that could start metering. So we did an impact evaluation of that metering right after, with a grant from 3IE and with our colleagues from Delhi School of Economics. And we found that impact of metering was reduced hours of pumping for boro season, reduced hours of self-use, and also basically water markets contracted in simple words. And those who were pushed out of the water markets were small and marginal farmers. And also water prices went up. So all this, basically contraction of water market from late 2000 led to high demand for electricity connection. Remember, farmers without electricity have to depend on diesel. Diesel is very expensive, etc. Yet getting new electricity connection was next to impossible, as we have shown in that previous graph, because there was a regulation in 1995 that required prior permit from groundwater departments. And you also had to, and then that was formalized through Groundwater Act of 2005. This basically shows percentage of permits which were approved. So there was lots of permits that were cancelled, even in districts which had a lot of groundwater. So this is what this graph shows. So based on our work by IWMI and executive, we were able to make a policy change. An executive order was passed by the government of West Bengal in 2011. So what happened was two things. One was that farmers no longer needed a prior permit from the groundwater department, so they could directly go to the groundwater department and get their pumps electrified. And the second one was, earlier farmers had to pay the full cost of electrification. Now they no longer need to pay that. Then what happened immediately was a steep increase in number of electric connections. As you can see, this is from 1978 all the way to 2008. All the new electric connections came here. This is the same graph, but just shown in terms of cumulative numbers. So you can see a sharp increase. Over 216,000 tubers were electrified. We did a study of that, which the one that Robin mentioned, and Mari and all of us in this group were also a part of that study. And we clearly showed that study, except for limited districts in North Bengal, electrification did not have so much of impact. And we then concluded that rising cost of boro cultivation and squeezed profit margin was the explanation. I'll also put a link to this study in the chat box later on, so that all of you can have a look. A very similar trend in Bangladesh, except that in Bangladesh, number of wells kept growing every year, and it has started declining only in recent years from 2010. This decline has been concomitant with sharp increase in diesel price and electricity tariffs. So diesel price has been increasing, and electricity tariffs have also been increasing. And as we mentioned, new regulation on well registration has started since 2018. The new thing in Bangladesh is very much focused on 100% rural electrification. So right now, 20% of shallow tube wells are electrified, and we know that there is a focus towards 100% electrification. So it seems to be on track. But then there could be a bottleneck in terms of these permits from Upazila committee. It's a very new provision in 2018. We don't yet know. I think we really need to study what's happening to this Upazila permit, and perhaps Professor Mondol or our colleagues from Bangladesh would be able to tell us that how it's been implemented. So our conclusion here is basically rising cost of diesel, etc. So that takes us towards the end of the presentation. Just 2 more sections to go.
Yes, IDT, sorry to interrupt. If you can make it in 10 minutes or less than that, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, Mary, I'll do my best. Yeah, thank you. So here we kind of talk about cost of cultivation, declining boro paddy, and the inevitable diversification that follows. Briefly, over the years, cost of cultivation has increased, particularly labor, fertilizer, as well as cost for irrigation have risen compared to the paddy prices, leading to some amount of diversification. There's more diversification in West Bengal than Bangladesh. Just some graphs to show cost of cultivation of boro and paddy price, and this graph actually shows the how the price to cost ratio has actually come down in Bangladesh. And this graph is about paddy price, and this is cost to price ratio. Is the similar graph in West Bengal. So cost to price ratio of paddy, boro paddy has come down over the years. We have data from mid 2000 all the way to 2017. In West Bengal, what has also happened is increase in diesel prices. These are not adjusted, but if you adjust it, it will be even steeper. Then a ratio of farm harvest price to diesel price has been on the decline, which basically shows that price of diesel relative to the farm harvest has gone up. Similarly, ratio of farm harvest price to daily wage rate has also been declining. So all this means steady decline in steady increase in diesel price, reduction over time of farm harvest of both almond and boro, as well as decline in farm harvest price to daily wage ratio. Both of this shows declining profitability of boro paddy, something we see both in West Bengal and Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, though, is the labor cost rather than irrigation cost, which is the largest share. So I know our colleagues from CMET and others and IRI have been working a lot on mechanization, and perhaps that is the requirement. So we can see that labor cost has increased and is the highest also. Irrigation costs haven't quite interestingly, and we wonder if it has been the impact of electric pumps, because electric pumps are irrigating from electric pump is way cheaper than irrigating from diesel pump. But I feel we need to dig a bit deeper with primary data. So because boro paddy cultivation has become less profitable, what has happened is there has been a rising trend towards diversification, and we measure that through Herfindahl index, where the lower value of the index means more crop diversification. And if you will see that West Bengal has a consistently lower value of this index compared to Bangladesh. Here we have combined all paddy together. So paddy is considered as one crop, and Aush, almond, boro are not considered as 3 separate crops, because we are interested in diversification beyond paddy. So we look at consider paddy as one. So more crop diversification in West Bengal compared to Bangladesh. And post 2010, diversification is also increasing in Bangladesh, but boro plus almond, that is rice, still dominates Bangladesh's cropping area. Some more graphs on intensification. This is for 1997-98, Bangladesh, West Bengal. These pie charts are showing total area. You can see almond, Aush, and so these three are the blue, this maroon and green are area under different paddy crops, and the orange one is other crops. So you can see in Bangladesh in 1997, 98, around 20% were under other crops. In West Bengal, it was a bit higher, 26% of the area was under other crops. And then when we divide these other crops, we see these are the major crops: jute, wheat, maize, potato, pulses, oilseeds, similar jute, wheat, maize, potato, pulses, oilseeds. So you can kind of get a comparative aspects. 2017-18, not strictly comparable with 97-98, because the crops are different. In 2097-98, nobody estimated vegetables and flowers and things like that. We have more of those estimation in the recent years. So don't compare it between the two, but it's okay to compare 2017 Bangladesh with 2017 West Bengal. what we see is that Bangladesh still has around a quarter of area to other crops, while in West Bengal, 40% of the crops is now non-paddy crop. So that's, I think, a big change that has happened in the last 1 decade, a large, huge diversification in West Bengal. And a large share of diversification is happening in terms of vegetable. Actually, West Bengal is now one of the largest vegetable growing states in India. In Bangladesh, it's quite mixed. Just some more, we show relatively more water intensive crops are jute, potato, and maize, and relatively less water intensive crops are pulses, oilseeds, and wheat. We see that both Bangladesh and West Bengal potato area has been increasing, and maize and jute has also been increasing in Bangladesh, while area under less water intensive crops like pulses, oilseeds, and wheat are declining in Bangladesh, but they're increasing in West Bengal. So West Bengal is moving towards less water intensive crops. Then we kind of then wanted to show all of it, bring together the summary in terms of the water, energy, food policies. So as I have already mentioned, popular discourse on groundwater in West Bengal right from 1990s has been around that groundwater, we are running out of groundwater. I mean, that kind of sums up our discourse in this part of the world. And I have done work in the past, and there's also work by many others who have shown the predominance of urban intelligentsia called Bhadralok, who almost always are descendants of absentee landlords. I mean, remember the zamindari system, 300 years ago. But what really happened was we have this urban class in West Bengal, mostly based in Kolkata, who have very little contact with rural realities, and they are among the political and the policy making classes. And this is very different in I would believe in Bangladesh, but certainly I know for sure is very different in states like Punjab and Gujarat, where the landed classes are also the same who are in positions of power, but that's not how it is here. So the other thing that would have happened is stories of groundwater overexploitation in Punjab, for instance, would have created an atmosphere of concern about the more environmentally leaning urban intelligentsia. And because West Bengal is a part of India, food security is not a concern, right? Because I mean, food will anyway come from any other part of India. On the other hand, popular discourse in Bangladesh has been very much around food security. And I think that has really made Bangladesh much more pro-groundwater than West Bengal. Though we are now listening to emerging concerns around groundwater overexploitation, which kind of culminated into this law. So this is a very nice figure that both Odindita, who has done a literature review, and Mari has put it together. This kind of is putting all the big policies together, and this is production of boro paddy. You can see West Bengal has lower production, Bangladesh has higher production. So in West Bengal, some of the relevant policies have been Operation Barga in 1977, which is the land reforms, followed very quickly by Panchayati Raj reforms. And that, I said, has been attributed by many as the main cause for rise in boro production. But at the same time, there have been other programs like million well schemes. In 1993, for the first time, West Bengal also started asking for this permit. This was limited to a few districts, but then this permit was then expanded to all the other districts in 2005. Then I've mentioned 2007 metering happened, 2011 amendment to the Groundwater Act of 2005 happened. So these are the main policies in West Bengal. The main policies in Bangladesh have been around privatization and credit. In 1985, there was a ban on import and sale of small diesel engine, but very soon in 1988, this was deregulation of liberalization of imports happened. And this ended the standardization, import without taxes for 3 to 20 horsepower pump, and we have seen rapid rise after this. 1992 also suspended groundwater management rules, which kind of meant that spacing norms were no longer required. In 2013, we have the Water Act, which is talking about limiting extraction in areas with critical groundwater condition. In 2018, we have the Groundwater Management Act plus licenses, etc. So I hope I haven't missed anything. Yeah, okay. So then that led us to look into groundwater, what exactly is happening, because there's a lot of concern about groundwater, and we find that yes, there is declining trends in groundwater on both sides of the border, especially after 2000. more so in the post-monsoon season when recharge should have happened. So declining trends are happening in West Bengal in spite of no increase in area and coverage of water-intensive crops since the last 2 decades, actually. I mean, boro area has stagnated, which means that there is no reason why crop EP could have gone up by itself unless that ET has gone up because of increase in temperature and declining rainfall. So these are some figures quickly put together by my colleague Yashoda. We are looking at depths to groundwater tables in West Bengal 2002-3. The important thing here, even though water tables would go down in the pre-monsoon season, they would recover in the post-monsoon season. That's what we are seeing in 2003. 2015 to 18, we are seeing that more areas, there is more groundwater levels are going down, and they aren't recovering that well either. Some more work on declining water tables. We can see declining trends in both the sides of the border, and trend of decline is higher in post-monsoon than pre-monsoon. Could it be that the recharge is at risk? And this is where I think we need more studies and more groundwater professionals need to look at it. This could be driven by climate change. In Bangladesh, we see minimum temperatures are rising in Bangladesh over 1990 to 2000 period. We find this is the temperature trend in Bangladesh, no particular temperature trend in West Bengal, but annual rainfall are declining in both Bangladesh and West Bengal over this period. So the chances are what we are seeing is really climate change induced changes in recharge, but that needs confirmation. This is pretty much the last slide. Bangladesh has moved to a solar irrigation. We have a project funded by the Swiss Development Corporation where we are looking at it in much more detail. But till now, Bangladesh has only around 2,000 solar pumps compared to the 1.5 million pumps. This is a very small number, but we feel that this is a move in the right direction. West Bengal doesn't have any appreciable program on solar irrigation. There may not be more than 100, 200 pumps here and there, mostly by NGOs. So I'll just conclude, just revisit those puzzle pieces. I think as it often happens with research, you solve one puzzle and more puzzles come back at you. But with boro paddy, what we find is that in Bangladesh, boro has really peaked, and I don't see how we can have further expansion in boro, or even if we need it. In West Bengal, there is actually a scope for expansion of boro. And I feel that with the COVID returnees and with the kind of destruction that COVID is already doing to our economies and the food security concern, West Bengal might as well think of expanding area under boro. And central to that would be better paddy prices. So we need to talk about procurement, and I believe one of our panelists will talk about procurement in Punjab. Given this, diversification is inevitable. So some of the work around value chains, markets, and infrastructures that ACIR is funding, but also our colleagues from CIMET are doing under CISA projects, I think, and IRI. I mean, those are, I think, very, very important to be understanding all those. How do we enable diversification without compromising food security? Around groundwater, I think a big unknown is what's happening to groundwater markets. And this is something we wouldn't know without primary studies. But what's important is that we have to understand the impact of climate change on groundwater recharge. I think that's where another area of research. On energy, electrification will continue, that's for certain, but whether that electricity will be clean electricity is the question, and all of us have to mitigate and adapt. Yes, in our part of the world, we have to put more on adaptation, but mitigation is also required. So there is a need for clean energy. It's almost clear that diesel pumps are untenable. So SIPs kind of provide, solar irrigation pumps provide mitigation and adaptation and climate co-benefits. So I think that's an important area. And in IWMI, we are happy to be working on that. Sorry. And the final part is around water, energy, food policies. I think that electrification is happening in Bangladesh. We need to really figure out in terms of the electricity tariffs. I understand it's all meter tariff, and how does the tariff impact water markets, etc. We need to understand and do more work and maybe do more policy advocacy around paddy procurement, especially both in Bangladesh, but especially in West Bengal, where in India there is a procurement policy, but farmers here don't get it. And then there is a large question mark around groundwater permits in Bangladesh. I would feel studies to see how these groundwater permits are working would be very useful. Thank you so much, and sorry I took longer, but yeah. Okay,
Thank you,
thanks.
Aditi. Yes, I think you needed longer for this very comprehensive overview. Thank you, Aditi. And I think we'll go now into our panel discussion, and I'm hoping that some of the unknown that you presented in your conclusion can be answered. So let's go directly, and we will start with Professor Sacha Mandal. So Professor Mandal, you can unmute yourself. Professor Mandal is an emeritus professor at the Bangladesh Agricultural University, BAU, is a renewed academic leader. He has been involved in agricultural economics, teaching, research, and policy planning since 1973. He was the Vice-Chancellor of BAU and a member of the Agriculture and General Economic Division of the Bangladesh Planning Commission. He's now advising FAO, CIMMYT, WorldFish, and other international organizations and the Bangladesh Ministry of Agriculture. Professor Mandal, I think you heard with us some of the findings of IDT pointing that the growth of shallow tube wells in Bangladesh seems to be leveling off since around 2010s, and we similarly see that boro is stagnating. And we heard this overall policy discourse where further expansion of boro is maybe discouraged because of groundwater concerns. And we heard farmers simply saying that they don't necessarily want to cultivate boro anymore because the profitability is there. So can you help us to understand what is happening on the boro front in Bangladesh?
Well, thank you very much, Mary. I'm very pleased to be here, and I can see all the known faces I have worked with in the past. What I would like to begin with is that I compliment Imi and Aditi as the team leader, and particularly Aditi's presentation has been a big canvas, and I like this because of the depth of the analysis and the comparison that she tried to make between Bangladesh and West Bengal. I have to look a bit more closely, really, her report or presentation. But right now, I would say that yes, the major conclusion that boro area has stagnated in Bangladesh, but not the production and yield. Both of them have increased in Bangladesh, really. Production has increased roughly at 1.1 to 1.2% per annum in recent years. And boro is still the dominant paddy, accounting for 54%, which has outstripped the earlier 54%, which has stripped the earlier almond paddy, which was the number one there. Okay, what are the key drivers? The drivers here is that Bangladesh has had a very tragic experience at the 2007 and 8 global food price hike, really. Bangladesh had money, but then could not import paddy, import rice.
Professor Mandal,
yeah?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so that made a major policy shift in the government house, and government means the new government, the present government, which is continuing, took over in 2009. So they put all our efforts really to achieve food self-sufficiency away from food or self-reliance. How did they do it? It invested hugely on agriculture research system and extension system, which resulted in a number of very smart, short duration, salt tolerant, high yielder varieties, including these HYV and hybrids. And they invested in management intervention, particularly in agronomy and soil management. So all that contributed to the sustaining of this boro paddy production. Yes, there has been a stagnation in shallow tube well number, and shallow tubewell acreage has stagnated at all, but it is still covers 2/3 of total irrigated area and 4/5 of the total groundwater irrigation there. So shallow tubewell has still remained as the lifeblood for irrigation for millions of farms. Um, Although Bangladesh shallow tubewell irrigation has increased, but there has been, yes, there has been officially spacing regulation, as Aditi mentioned on papers, really. There has not been any effect, not now, not even in the past, really. So it has been a kind of free environment. Upazila committee exists, but people don't feel any existence or any effect on that, really. We have to be very clear on this aspect. Profitability concern was expressed very rightly, but for the last 2-3 years, benefit cost ratio has risen quite appreciably because of at least few factors. One is this mechanization which took place in tillage, in planting, in harvest and post-harvest operation, and now these combined harvesters are coming in the private sector as a business. That has reduced cost of production. The second is the increasing paddy and rice price in the last 2-3 years, really, because of government procurement price, but as well as the import, export, and local production economic dynamics. And thirdly, there is a new change that there is not that much of glut in the peak harvest season of boro, really. And that means that farmers have developed their own resilience or storability of the harvested crop at that time in the hope of higher prices in the post-harvest period, really. So all those culminated into a factor that there has been good price incentive for the last 2-3 years, really. And the second question, probably I would like to address, given my limited time, is the electrification and groundwater irrigation.
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. I can see the latest figure is that about 45% of irrigation is powered by electricity, and 1/3 of shallow tubewell irrigation by electricity, meaning that another 2/3 of shallow tubewell irrigation is given or powered by diesel. One thing which helps is that there is a 20% subsidy on electricity, and that's not a big amount really, but it helps at least the farmers in many number of ways. Really. There are positive impacts on that. Number one, electricity run irrigation has been cheaper than diesel run. I mean, Aditi has mentioned that as well. Second is that there isn't much of a pressure on the pump owners or water sellers for cash expenses as required for diesel pumps, for repair, maintenance of engines, and procuring diesel from the marketplaces and other things. The third factor is the water supply with these irrigated, electrified pumps, really, has been much, much better and more reliable, and that created confidence both in the water sellers and the water buyers, really, to invest in boro paddy production. It saves time and it saves cost as well. Really. But there are negative impacts of electricity. One is the direct subsidy cost. Maybe modest, but still it's a cost on the government budgetary expenses. But in Bangladesh government, uh, considers this subsidy as an investment because they are about policies to achieve food grain self-sufficiency, really, and no inch of land is asked to remain vacant, really. I mean, that's a message from the top government ministers and the Prime Minister herself, really. So they see it as an investment. Unmetered connections are there. There are many still. And there, the over-irrigation and wastage of water is reported. I don't have any evidence, but there are anecdotal evidence which proves it. And finally, the informal water market, which is our pet subject and very close to my heart. There are 1.5 million informal shallow tube well companies still running, and there are multi-owners and multi-ownership in that. It's not a monopoly anywhere. There has been a fairly competitive environment in managing this shallow tube. Because these water sellers take care of the local microenvironment, particularly in understanding the soil type, topography, water requirement. They also recognize the social embeddedness in resolving if there are any social conflict in command area management. There are new entries, there are exits really, and very recently, there are merging really of command areas that two shallow tubers and possibly by one owner or a group of owners really. And particularly with this electricity that has happened really, which gives a little bit of economies of scale in operating these shallow tubers. There have been innovative payment systems really. Innovative, I say because it's a 1/4 to 1/5 crop share, which saves irrigators really from paying money at the beginning or throughout the irrigation season. You can pay when the crop is harvested. That's a good practice here. But there are also now, with this commercialization of agriculture, cash payment per unit of land, per unit of time is being practiced, where the water seller themselves either organize their own diesel fuel, or farmers themselves bring their own power flame with payment of these fixed charges. So that's why I call innovative payment system, which has worked very well. Access of the small and marginal farmers to this informal water market remain very high. It's still increased. There isn't any problem with that really. Electricity connections to pumps, in that sense, benefits. One is this little subsidy. The other is this having an electricity connection to your tube well allows you also, directly or indirectly, to have electricity connection for your domestic use as well, really. So that's a very attractive proposal. So largely, I see it's a win-win situation for both water sellers and water buyers, but the condition is that good paddy price must prevail, which we see for the last 2-3 years. Thank you very much indeed.
No, thank you to you, Professor Mendel. And I think we'll continue that discussion on the water market with Professor Koichi Fujita. So Professor Fujita is at the Center of Post-Office Asian Studies at Kyoto University since 2006. He specialized in agricultural economics, rural socioeconomics research in contemporary South and Southeast Asia, with an emphasis on the issues such as land, tenure, irrigation, and water management. So I think Professor Fujita, we are just continuing this discussion on the water market, and you have worked on water market both in West Bengal and Bangladesh. So can you share with us some of your observation? And I think looking at the chat, we are also very curious of understanding what do we know from the recent years of how these water markets are evolving.
Okay, thank you very much. Very honorable to be invited as panelist here. Thank you very much. I would like to first talk about the difference between West Bengal and Bangladesh from my perspective. In Bangladesh, now very recent years, shallow tube well accounted for nearly 60% of total irrigated area, and 20% deep tube well, and the remaining 20% low lift pumps that lift up surface water, not groundwater. So Bangladesh is relatively plentiful in water, even in dry season. And so that what I found most important difference between the two regions is the more ecological sense and the rainfall. And for example, when I surveyed in West Bengal some villages, I found in the late already 1990s, already they started to introduce submersible pumps. And so, of course, now Bangladesh also has some submersible pumps because of the declining groundwater table. But I think this problem is more hard, more severe in West Bengal than in Bangladesh. So that should be considered when we explore the expansion of boro paddy area in the future in West Bengal. And second point is that I want to talk about the sharply declining average area per irrigation mechanism. For example, shallow tube well, diesel operated shallow tube well. When I looked at the latest minor irrigation survey data, I found that only 1.8 acre per one unit. And it was in the early 1990s, it was around 10 or 15 acres. But now less than 2 acres per unit of shallow tube well. That means that so the capacity utilization of each machineries has been declining very rapidly. And many farmers now own their own machinery and with a very limited shrinked water markets. So that the, of course, paddy price is now declining compared to diesel price or electricity. But another important aspect is the more, how to say, costly shallow tube wells or deep tube wells or other machineries for farmers. That is so that the I think before 1990s the water markets was more or less monopolized nature, but gradually it was not so. And now I don't think monopoly is there, of course, because of the very localized market. But still, there are a lot of competition between shallow tubers and deep tubers and others. So under such situation, we need to consider what the next policy for. I didn't know, frankly speaking, 2018 spacing again, government of Bangladesh introduced, but is it a matter? I don't know, because so many now already shallow tubers and no more increase room. And I think conversion from diesel to electricity or conversion from diesel or electricity to solar pumps can be happened in the future in Bangladesh. And lastly, I want to mention another important aspect. From late 2000, 2007 or 8, after that, the labor wage rate in Bangladesh increased very rapidly in a real sense, real wage rate, about 5% per year for 10 years about. So now labor cost is very, very high compared to rice and also maybe diesel, compared to diesel also. So under such situation, the tenant farming is now increasing by landless or marginal farmers. So maybe in the future, they are the major player to produce rice in Bangladesh. So under such situation, how the irrigation policy should be, we need to consider more seriously. That is my short comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this comment, and that's clearly because yes, a lot of the findings we had in this project or in the previous one. Yes. I'm now looking virtually toward Dr. Anindita Sarkar. Sorry, Tushar, I see you put your camera, but if that's okay, we'll start with Anindita. So Anindita, you're an associate professor for geography at Miranda House, University of Delhi since 2005. And Anindita has been an active researcher on agricultural sustainability, natural resource management, water management, and groundwater markets. Anindita, you have been working with us on that project and help you were very helpful in doing the literature review for this work. Can you tell us what really struck you as the main differences between West Bengal and Bangladesh when it comes to the groundwater growth trajectories and to the policies around groundwater and energy? And I will add, you were also saying to us that you see some similarities between Bangladesh and some of the work that you did before on Punjab. So you can also explain us what are these similarities and why you think so.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak in this panel. I would be very short because when I was doing literature review, you can understand it was enormous amount of literature that is available both in Bangladesh and in West Bengal. So I was reading through my own review and I could point out 6 major pointers where I saw there were very, very starking difference in literature and how academicians and policymakers look at groundwater irrigation and particularly boro rice cultivation in both these 2 regions. So firstly, it's very interesting to see in West Bengal, literature says that small fragmented land holdings and very regressive agrarian structure is one of the reasons why groundwater irrigation and boro cultivation and green water revolution cannot take place or could not have taken place before that. Interestingly, in Bangladesh, the scholars time and again come out with this finding that small landholding is not a deterrent for adoption of groundwater irrigation. It is the small landholdings, small and marginal farmers have gone ahead, taken up shallow tube wells, and it has brought about boro cultivation and green revolution. Whereas in West Bengal, we see all the literature, it says that because of lack of control, because this agrarian structure could not assist in groundwater irrigation, that's why green revolution was delayed. As a result, there is this huge body of literature which indicates to the fact that the green revolution, which is called the late green revolution in West Bengal, because India saw green revolution in mid-60s in Punjab and Haryana in the western India. So here we see in 80s, beginning of 80s, the boro cultivation takes place and there is huge increase in rice production. And all the scholars associate this with the agrarian revolution, which is Operation Barga and registering sharecroppers, land reforms. So this is very interesting to see that in this entire debate, the importance of groundwater as the driver of green revolution, as the driver for agricultural growth, is somewhere shadowed, I would say. Although some scholars do say that it is indirectly related, groundwater irrigation is indirectly responsible for this growth, but somehow in literature it is not being so prominent. There can be two reasons for this. The main reason, which Dr. Mukherjee also pointed out, there is very lack of consistent data from West Bengal. So all these studies which point out towards the reasons for drivers of green revolution in West Bengal are all micro studies coming out from village level studies, data collected at primary level, which cannot be corroborated to the macro data because it's not available. Data is not available separately for groundwater irrigated area and surface water irrigated area. So there is a big gap here. And maybe, again, I would quote Dr. Mukherjee's presentation where she talks about the urban intelligentsia. Here also, I have a feeling that most of the literature that was coming from the left academician background, they had to kind of glorify the land reforms, which was very successful in West Bengal and did not happen in the other part of the country. So of course, we have to give a lot of credit to the land reforms, but by giving credit to the land reforms, in a way, groundwater irrigation has not been so much glorified. That is why in later sections in the study, we see that in all literature in Bangladesh, there is a direct conclusion where the scholars are saying that because of groundwater irrigation expansion, boro cultivation has increased, increasing farmers' profitability, farmers' income, and directly relating it to poverty reduction. Whereas in West Bengal, none of that literature is pertaining to that. Only when there is this huge body of literature, which IWMI especially does, and Dr. Mukherjee in her PhD, where the scholars are saying that how informal groundwater markets have helped the small and marginal farmers who did not own their own wells, could borrow water, could buy water and irrigate their crops, and hence groundwater irrigation indirectly leads to poverty reduction. And it helps to increase income of small and marginal farmers. Then comes this huge story of depletion, which Dr. Shah talks about. It's as a textbook-like solution. I read in one of his literature. It's like, because the Western India, which started groundwater irrigation and green revolution in mid-60s, started showing signs of depletion in early 90s. That's why it is as if the entire country is going through a problem of depletion. And the same narrative is again woven around West Bengal, which at least the data does not show that amount of depletion like the data is showing in Punjab. So this entire fear of depletion has led to the successive policies, which was discussed in the presentation about its restrictive groundwater use. Then the other thing is interesting thing about the groundwater policies. Whereas in West Bengal, the entire debate on restrictive groundwater use and the policies were based on how not to give electricity connection or keep the electricity rate, flat rate very high, or even later, which is now at present the time of the day rate, so that electricity has different rates in different time of the day, that is so high. So the cost of cultivation, because of groundwater irrigation being irrigated by high electricity charges and of course diesel, is quite high. So then that debate is coming around. Whereas in Bangladesh, whenever there are studies which talks about taking care of groundwater resources, restoring groundwater resources, it is more about water saving technologies, making the pumps more efficient, like bringing about axial flow pumps. That debate is not there in West Bengal. For West Bengal, to preserve groundwater, give no connection, increase the price of electricity that way. Whereas in Bangladesh, it is recently only we saw this policy of 2018 where there is siting norms have come back. It was, but literature is still not come to that, because I understand it's a very new policy. So we'll see the repercussions later. Then another most interesting thing is about liberalization that I would like to really talk. Interestingly, both the countries saw liberalization at the same time. Bangladesh in 1988, when the pumps became cheaper because standardization norms were eliminated and import duties were eliminated. So these cheap Chinese pumps were easily imported by Bangladeshi farmers, which reduced their irrigation cost to a great extent. So the studies talk about how there was this major spurt of groundwater irrigation in two phases. First, when liberalization happened in the 70s, and then when it happened in 1988. So there is a lot of praise, and liberalization is accepted, and it's kind of associated with this boon in food production, which is good for the country and also increasing in farmers' income. Whereas in West Bengal, we see just the opposite of that. In 1991, when the liberalization happened, the policies talk of increasing fertilizer prices, declining in institutional credits, which was always very low in West Bengal. I must mention in Bangladesh, credit has played a major role. Although they have gone for liberalization, but there was availability of credit from formal sources, and microcredit is another story in Bangladesh. The scholars know it. I won't go into the detail. And the diesel prices also rose. So because of these three factors in West Bengal, time and again, the scholars have noted that liberalization has led to increase in cost of cultivation and hence declining return and negatively impacting boro paddy. And the last thing, the very, very interesting thing in all the literature, the conclusion, it seems that although depletion, groundwater issues are contested in both West Bengal and Bangladesh, in Bangladesh, groundwater irrigation is considered as the pillar of food production and food security. So it is like groundwater irrigation is everybody's business because everybody wants food. The country has to look at food self-sufficiency. Whereas in West Bengal, somehow it seems as if groundwater irrigation is only farmers' business. Groundwater irrigation leads to crop production and farmers' income, which is only farmers' issue. Because food self-sufficiency, the food can come from somewhere else also. It need not be by using West Bengal's groundwater resources. It can come from Punjab, it can come from Haryana. West Bengal groundwater resources, if utilized to eradicate poverty among Bengali farmers, it's just increasing their income. It's not associated with food, and that is why I suppose the popular debate is always about restoring the groundwater resource. It's not about using it for the eradication of poverty or looking at farmers' income, associating it with that. So that's what I could see when I was doing the literature review. So the other question was on how I would look at the similarities of my work in Punjab and in Bangladesh. I would not say similarities, but I would of course say the timeline is very similar. Because if you see, Green Revolution started in both Bangladesh and India. India here, Western India, Punjab, Haryana, and Western Uttar Pradesh at the same time. But the difference in the policy was that India chose Western India and wheat because it was considered that India had an area-specific approach. So only those areas were chosen which had good infrastructure. Irrigation could be controlled. There was that's why wheat was chosen, rabi crop, and because of water control, because HYV seeds could give 200% more yield in a controlled irrigation, whereas it would not give so much yield. That was the logic. And Eastern India, that's why was completely left out because it was considered humid, which would lead to pest attacks. Water could not be controlled because it had a high to medium rainfall. So the entire policy focus, the food grain policy focus was towards Northwestern India, and subsequently all the government subsidies were put into this. So as if the Northwestern India was responsible for providing food to the entire nation. Whereas at the same time, very interestingly, Bangladesh also started a green revolution, but focused on boro paddy for the same reason, because boro again is a crop when there is no rainfall, completely irrigated, because HYV seeds give good yield with controlled irrigation. But boro rice was the main focus of Bangladesh, whereas wheat became the main focus. Probably it was because of the dietary preferences of India and Bangladesh. That is what I can think. Or I would say Indian scientists, agricultural scientists, did not take up as this option, and West Bengal was completely deprived of that attention that it could have got, provided if we would have also gone for boro in the first phase. So if you see that when West Bengal had started with the land reforms in the 70s, the agrarian reforms, Bangladesh had already taken up boro cultivation. The profits were high. By early 70s, farmers had started investing in their own tube wells from the profit they were accruing. At that time, nothing was happening in West Bengal. So when the first phase of liberalization was happening in Bangladesh, farmers in West Bengal were getting mini kits from the seed fertilizer kits, which the government, the Panchayati Raj, the local governments were distributing. Similarly, if you see when Bangladeshi farmers were digging wells with their profit from boro, Punjabi farmers were actually also had gone in digging wells because there were huge amount of profit. There were this notion that there is because of canal irrigation there will be salinization, and then tube well is a good option to pump out that, and there was this assistance loan. So Punjabi farmers in 70s had started growing rice, which was never kind of thought of, because now they had this profit with which they could have the wells. And associated with that, we see, of course, we have this procurement policy in India, because we had seen famines and we were importing food grains. So that was the need of the hour. But it continued and continued and continued. And we all know the debate about on MSP. Very interestingly, only in 1997, central government announced this decentralized procurement price policy. So earlier that, it was only procuring from these states, the Green Revolution bill. And in 1997, the central government said that now they could procure grains from all over the country. The states can get into MOU with the center and say that they also want to sell grains to the center. Very interestingly, in 1997, Punjab announces free electricity for farmers. So it was like a balancing act. So once the procurement policies are there, you have assured income, but you had to pay some amount of flat electricity tariff, which was also very low. But in 1997, it became completely free. Whereas we have already seen the story of West Bengal. There was restrictive policies. 1993, there were siting norms. Plus, there were till 2005, there were all these policies which did not let the farmers take even electricity connection, when Punjab was having free electricity. So as a result, you see, now comes the difference. It's no longer similar. The stories look, the timeline looks similar, but the support system was different. Bangladesh, it was more liberalized. It was privatized, less of control and more of support, maybe in terms of microcredit. Whereas West Bengal did not get anything of that sort from the center. Now, another thing, very recently, I just saw in the newspaper that why did this decentralized PDS did not work? Number one, some papers write that the MSPs that were announced were lower than the cost of cultivation in West Bengal, because in West Bengal the cost of cultivation is very high because groundwater irrigation charges are high, because they pay for diesel, pay for high electricity, whereas in Punjab that is zero. So the cost of cultivation is higher than the MSP that the central government is giving to the Bengali farmers. That is why only 5% rice is being procured from West Bengal, which is around 29 to 30% from Punjab. The other thing is very interestingly is that the center gives the money later. For example, the states have to procure from the farmers and then sell it to the center. So in order to procure rice, if the West Bengal government wants to procure rice and then sell it to the center, it has to be around, some estimate is around 4,000 crore. So that much money the state has to, give to the farmers, and then it would be given back to them. So there is this huge problem. Moreover, the PDS infrastructure is very poor in West Bengal. The farmers are not able to sell their rice. They're selling it to small traders, and then it is taken over by the state agencies and then given to Food Corporation of India.
Okay. And indeed, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Yes, well,
I have completed.
Yes, thank you. That's right. I just give you some time for the other panelists. Sure, and I would invite those interested to also read the report that will follow this presentation, where I think we'll have more details on these policies. So maybe Dr. Shah, I think you will obviously be able to bring us some more details on the public policy angle of this work. Dr. Tushar Shah is an economist and public policy specialist, and is an emeritus scientist of IWMI and a professor emeritus of the Institute of Rural Management in Anna. And I think most of us know you for the extensive work you have done in terms of publication, but also in helping shaping the national debates and the public policies in the last years. So, Dr. Shah, what are your thoughts on these different trajectories on the groundwater policies and the institution between West Bengal and Bangladesh? And I will, as a second question, very briefly now, I would ask you also to tell us a bit of your recent work in West Bengal and your thought on potential merit of mixed tariffs.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm delighted to be on this panel. I want to start by complimenting Aditi for an excellent presentation. I learned a lot. Quickly, I think since we don't have much time, I think this entire discussion about electricity pricing and the way it affects the water market needs to be situated within a larger question that was very popular in the 1970s and 80s, but has been lost sight of in the recent debate. And I think the question was, is there an optimal way of organizing the groundwater economy of a village? If you remember, in the 1960s and 70s, the state governments in India were extremely very, very active in building public tube wells. And the whole idea there was that by government investing in heavy-duty tube wells and providing irrigation service to farmers, you can actually create an efficient irrigation economy. We must also remember that the groundwater investments were being compared with canal irrigation investment. After all, farmers were interested in getting irrigation service. And if groundwater tube wells could provide that more cost effectively, then the government should support that. So I think the question was that, can we imagine an ideal organization of the village groundwater economy? And if you go back to the discussion in those years, the architecture of the groundwater economy was to be judged on the productivity impact. Are you putting more capital in tube wells than you need to in, say, irrigating 1,000 acres of land? Number two, are water buyers getting irrigation service at the same price, at the same cost as water sellers do? And third, are the built-in corrective factors to check over-exploitation of the resource or sustainability? So I think that this discussion on electricity pricing needs to be situated in that context. In India, for example, we have had two extremes. We have regions where a typical village economy is served by a small number of large tube wells, heavy-duty tube wells. Gujarat is an example of that, where in a village with 1,500 hectares of land, you will just have 20, 30, 40 tube wells, which will have invested in buried pipeline networks, and that would provide irrigation service to every square inch of that village. So you have that arrangement. On the other hand, you also have places like Bihar, where almost every farmer, groundwater levels are so high that you have boreholes in almost every plot of land, and a diesel pump keeps circulating around. So I think there are varieties in which you can organize the groundwater economy of a village. And the discussion about flat versus metered came because it had a profound impact in the way tubewell owners behave. When the pumps are managed by the government, then of course the question of pricing, etc., doesn't really matter. But then we know that the public tubewells collapsed in almost every state, and the private tubewells began to dominate. So when that came into picture, at what cost do private tubewell owners provide irrigation service to buyers became very, very important. The question came to a head in states like Gujarat, where the price that water buyers used to pay was 4 or 5 times higher than the average cost of service. And therefore, water sailors were called water lords. The tubewell owners were called water lords. And you found that if you change the way you priced electricity for farmers, then you could almost overnight change the way the tubewell owners behave. So I think that the water market that Aditi studied for a PhD in West Bengal was actually closest to the ideal that you could imagine. You had very few tube wells. Each one was operating for very long hours. So the capacity utilization of that tube well was very high. The farmers or the water buyers were getting irrigation service at nearly the same price, the same cost as water sailors were getting. So I think that was basically very close to what could be an ideal irrigation organization. And Gujarat actually always tried to do that. Now, the point that I want to make is that I think West Bengal probably made it impossible for tubewell owners to continue to remain in business by hacking a flat tariff from 1,100 rupees to 10,000 rupees in a very short span of time. Now, in the context of business finance, what you've done is that you've increased the operating leverage of that enterprise so high that nobody would want to own a tubewell. I don't think this was the only option available. I think there were other options available. What Gujarat did was that it went in the opposite direction. Gujarat tubewell owners today, they pay a flat tariff that is lower than what they paid in 1988. So I think farmers in West Bengal and farmers in Gujarat both organized, but to different ends. Farmers in West Bengal organized in order to oppose flat tariff because the flat tariff was raised so high that it was impossible for them to remain in business. Farmers in Gujarat organized in order to keep flat tariff so low that they can continue to exploit the government and the electricity companies and remain in business. I think that there is a middle path, and the mixed tariff that we tried to kind of pilot in West Bengal was an attempt to do that. That if you, instead of charging the tubewell owners 12,000 rupees, if you were to charge them 3,000 rupees of fixed tariff, and we charge 2 rupees per kilowatt on metered basis, on consumption-linked tariff, then you could actually create a groundwater economy that is closer to the ideal that we want. And you also have the additional advantage of metering. So I think both Gujarat as well as West Bengal could have managed their power tariff policies better. And I think this basically just illustrates the point that just managing power tariff could actually have such a profound impact on the way the groundwater economy in a region operates. The other point that I want to make is that there were two very popular hypotheses that we had taken for granted all along, which are actually kind of looking very shaky. One of these is the role of pump density on competitive behavior. For a long time, it was argued that if you increase the number of the pumping density in a village, if you have more and more farmers owning tube wells, then they will necessarily become more competitive, or they would become more pro-poor. You will have more pro-poor. But I don't think the evidence in West Bengal as well as elsewhere is showing that the single act of changing power tariff probably produces much more competition among tubewell owners. The second is the impact of metering and the marginal cost. We used to think all along that a flat tariff produces a competitive market by making tubewell owners behave as if marginal cost of energy is zero. I think that certainly is true. But had that been the case, then electric tubewell owners in West Bengal should be offering farmers much better terms than diesel pump owners do. But actually, the electric pump owners today are nearly as exploitative in West Bengal as diesel pump owners, although they have just 1/4 or 1/5 of the marginal cost faced by the diesel pumps. We also have the same situation in Gujarat, where the meter tubewell owners, they pay a flat tariff which is just 10% of the cost to serve. And therefore, the metered farmers ought to be behaving pretty much like the flat tariff owners. But the flat tariff farmers are behaving very differently. So I think there are two separate effects. One is of the marginal cost, and the second is of the fact of metering. The fact that you get metered changes your whole outlook towards the business. And I think that this is something that we should test in the future. But coming to the second question, I think that in the years to come, the same issue of how best to organize the village irrigation economy is going to come back with the solar pump, because it's a new technology, and every new technology calls into action new kinds of institutional arrangements. And I think that solar pumps being much more capital intensive than diesel pumps and electric tubewells, I think the question of organizing the solar economy to improve capital utilization is very, very important. If you have 102 kilowatt solar pumps in a village, which each one of them operated only 10% of the time, I think you're going to create an extremely inefficient irrigation economy versus a village in which there are just 10 kilowatt solar pumps which provide service to all the other farmers. So I think it's important to realize that in order to get good irrigation service, it's not inevitable that you own the pump, that you can create an institutional arrangement in which a small number of farmers or entrepreneurs own the pumps, and the rest of the village gets irrigation service. And there are opportunities for harvesting, efficiency, equity, as well as sustainability by choosing carefully a design or the architecture of a solar pump-based irrigation economy. So I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. We'll now get to our last panelist, Mr. Arno Koshwa. So Arno Koshwa is a principal water resource specialist with the South Asia Regional Department of the Asian Development Bank, and is currently based in India, even if working remotely, where he also works in Nepal and Bangladesh on a water resources project. So Mr. Koshwa, we learned that ADB is embarking on a new strategy for agriculture and natural resources in Bangladesh. Okay, can you explain on what is going in that strategy, and what is the place of groundwater irrigation, maybe crop diversification in that strategy, and how does that relate to the context of climate change and potentially declining resources? That's my first point, and then my second point, which I will also ask very briefly to the other panelists, is what is the main takeaway that you're taking from this work, and how that can influence your future strategy, I mean the ADB strategy in your case?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the IWMI colleagues for inviting ADB to this webinar. Fascinating discussion, I find, and great to see again Aditi, Dr. Tushar, and so on. Now, I would say it's very timely for us, of course, to be part of this webinar, as we are working on this, I would not say new strategy, but let's say, every year every 5 years we have a new cycle of programming in the country where we work, and we revisit, our priorities, and this. For Bangladesh, we will have a new country partnership strategy in 2021 up to 2023. And so we took this opportunity again to revisit a little bit what we were doing in the agriculture, natural resource sectors, and to define maybe our strategy for the next 5 years. This is based on overall broad sector performance overview, the identification of the critical constraints and the opportunities. We're looking as well at past performance in our project. We are looking also the shift in national strategies and priorities, and of course the overall strategy 2030 of ADB. And we also, as part of this, have a lot of stakeholder consultation, which I believe also happened with IWMI recently. And I have to say that I haven't been directly involved in developing this very specific strategy, but I'm part still of the division, and we've been reviewing the result. So this is still work in progress, but the proposed framework objective is to support the achievement of modernized, efficient, sustainable, and climate smart agriculture, natural resource sector. This is a rather broad objective, but it relies essentially on 4 pillars to guide our actions. The first pillar is about promoting agriculture, commercialization, and value chain development. Second pillar is about improving connectivity and market infrastructure. The third pillar is about enhancing water use efficiency at this point in time. This is how we've named that. Also, there's still a bit of debate of that. And natural resource management. And the point 4 is about synergy approaches, supporting cross-sectoral linkages in the ANR broader development perspective. So this is about collaboration between, ADB Agriculture division and the other divisions on energy, on transport, connectivity, markets, and so on and so forth. Now, regarding your question about what do we do and what we intend to do on crop diversification, groundwater resource management, or groundwater resource in general, that relates obviously to pillar 3, 1 and 4, 1 and 4 indirectly. But again, this is still something which we are discussing on. The matter of groundwater, in the past, we have basically focused essentially. I mean, we haven't been really involved in groundwater per se. Over the past years, our involvement has been very limited. Our efforts have focused on modernizing small scale and large scale surface irrigation, where productivity, particularly in the later, has remained extremely low, particularly in large scale irrigation. And our effort, which will continue in the next 5 years, have been to pilot institutional and technical innovation to improve service delivery to farmers, particularly ensuring sustainable management, operation, and maintenance of the systems in large-scale irrigation, improving water use efficiency. And in doing so, we've been introducing, piloting more than introducing really, PPP options, moving away from public service, public managed systems. We've been, for example, experimenting management contract. We've been also supporting the development of buried pipe tertiary distribution system, conversion from diesel to electric pump for low lift pumped, which are quite developed in a number of large-scale irrigation system, and which had the same issues than the issues of tube well owners and tube well markets or groundwater markets. Interestingly, this is the work that we've done has been inspired a lot by the model of the Bahrain Multipurpose Authority, which has developed, as you know, more than 100,000 hectares, including several thousand hectares, which rely solely on groundwater. In the Bahrain tract, it's in the northern part of the country. And we've been applying this to modernize some of the irrigation, large-scale irrigation system, or looking at modernizing this irrigation system. Now, for the next generation of project, we've been looking at groundwater in the context, in fact, of developing conjunctive use of surface and groundwater as part of the modernization approach of this large-scale irrigation system. Now, many of these systems in Bangladesh, but also in other places in India, they suffer from acute water scarcity during the dry season, but also some dry spell during the Kharif or the Aman season, depending where you are. And groundwater can play a critical role here in securing reliable but also flexible water supply. And many of these systems are could rely on fairly large aquifer. And the studies we've had on very localized, groundwater modeling exercise have shown that these aquifers still have a very strong potential to meet the water balance deficit, particularly in the dry season, in a sustainable manner. So we've been developing, strategies of modernization that combines use of surface and groundwater, and particularly, allowing farmers to access more reliable and to some extent also flexible service delivery, irrigation service delivery through these kind of systems. When it comes to standalone groundwater development management project, we have not yet identified investment in Bangladesh, but it is a priority of the 8 plan to try to increase water use efficiency in crop production, preserve groundwater. So we are still looking at this, as I said, in surface water, combining conjunctive and surface water use. We also have, our energy division, which is looking at developing solar pump and trying to develop suitable models for financing and maintaining these solar pump, and collaboration with them here has started. We've started to work together, and we will continue to work together, because this is part of the, as I would say, pillar 3 in our strategy, where we need to combine our resources to try to see what's really the prospect here in developing solar energy for groundwater.
Okay.
What else? What else? I think that's good enough. Now, looking at maybe if you want some takeaway, or you want to
exactly. Go ahead with your takeaways. Yes. And
yeah, so takeaways in a nutshell for me. So this, boro paddy in Bangladesh, this is basically, in terms of area, it's about already 80% of Amman, which clearly show that there's very little prospect for further expansions. But at the same time, so we know that government is very focused on food self-sufficiency, that population growth is going to continue. What we have seen, basically the options now are probably towards diversification, the option to increase, to continue to grow in staple food is probably to move towards, to some extent, diversification, but also to look at now how to increase the yields, which are still, there's still a strong potential for that. And of course, we've seen this happening. I think this was mentioned by one of the panelists already in our project, where this hybrid variety brought substantial increase in yield already. So there's something to be looked at here. And we will also need to continue to support reduction of cost of production. So we've talked about solar, but also electrification, which we are working on surface and so on. And then when it comes to this matter of groundwater depletion, now this is a very important element. To be frank, it has reached a point now where we can't really talk about further development of groundwater. I was explaining that in our modernization strategy for very large scale irrigation system, we are trying to develop this conjunctive system. And we have been facing substantial resistance, even though we had provided evidence and that through groundwater modeling that these aquifers could sustain this conjunctive development of conjunctive system. We've been facing a lot of resistance simply on the, because of this now obsession that groundwater is depleting, and this is causing a lot of problems. So there's really a need there to come back on that debate, and somehow be able to put some more, some more realistic figures on what's really happening. And the question you're raising about whether this is climate change induced is quite scary in a sense, and would really definitely deserve to be looked at carefully. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay. No, thank you for this last point. I think I'll now need to be extremely mindful of time, and if that's okay for everybody, we'll maybe not take more questions. So if you have burning questions, please put those in the chat box, and then we can answer after the webinar. That's the way we will do it. I'll simply now just conclude by asking Dr. Tushar, if you have a 30-second takeaway, can you tell us what it would be?
Well, I was wondering, Aditi, whether you picked up anything on newly started recharge efforts in West Bengal. I think there is a World Bank supported project, and the government of West Bengal also has been taking a lot of interest in deepening ponds and building recharge structures. Has that begun to show any results? Because in Gujarat, we find that areas, Saurashtra, which used to be a basket case in 1990s, today CJWB has declared it as out of, there is scope for more groundwater development there. So perhaps a big recharge effort can actually improve groundwater conditions in West Bengal rather quickly, because it has a very high rainfall, and also its aquifer structure is more conducive to recharge. So that basically is one.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shah. Dr. Sakar Anindita, do you have a 30-second takeaway to share with us?
Yeah, sorry, my mic was. So I think the most interesting thing that came out from this presentation was that still there is huge scope for boro cultivation in West Bengal, which Bangladesh has already achieved. So yeah, I think policies could be geared towards that. And since there are talks about kickstarting green revolution in West Bengal and taking off some groundwater pressure from the traditional green revolution belt of India, that would be very good for a national policy. We should pursue that, because now West Bengal should feed the country, no longer Punjab and Haryana, because we have to think about groundwater sustainability at the national level. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Fujita, may I ask you the same question? What are your main takeaway, and how does that resonate with your own future work, prospective work?
Yes, I think, yes. In the case of Bangladesh, I think still diversification of agriculture is not at all enough. And not now, from now on, I think rather than boro cultivation, another crops should be promoted with irrigation. That is my last message. Thank you.
Okay, absolutely clear. Thank you. And we will just finish with you, Professor Mandal. You started, you will be the last one to talk as well. I saw that you posted a number of points on the chat. Thank you for that. What is there one of these points that you want to underline further?
Yeah, thank you very much. But in addition to that, I would like Bangladesh and West Bengal. So it's not a standalone case anymore, really. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mandal. I think we missed part of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you be able to repeat? I think the connection is better now.
Yeah. I think in addition to 3 points that I have mentioned in the chat box, I would like to add that irrigation is no longer a standalone issue. In Bangladesh, experience shows that irrigation must be seen as a part of large-scale agricultural commercialization process that has started involving this private sector and then rural entrepreneurs really coming in the processing, the growing food industry, and value chain development. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, and I think we'll just come to an end. I must say a big thank you to all of you participants who I know spend time on this webinar, which shows us your appreciation of those topics. And I know spending time in those difficult times in some of your countries is really meaningful. So thank you for that. A big thank you to the speakers, to ACR for the support for this project, to ADT for the presentation, to our 5 panelists, and I'll finish by thanking you again, Dr. Partha Banerjee and his team for the data collection in West Bengal, and the team of NGO Forum for the data collection in Bangladesh. Thanks to you. With that, I will simply close. I think it was a vibrant discussion. I hope the discussion will continue. There are a number of topics that we are still working on, and where we identified more work is needed. I think maybe we can go back and keeping in mind this puzzle that IDT showed us at the beginning. There are things that we know in this puzzle, and that things that we still don't know, and where we think more work is needed. And I hope we also create an area where we know each other and we can communicate, because we know we are working on those topics. So with that, just thank you again, and have a good day.